Discovery Season 1 made a bold decision that Star Trek hasn't dared repeat since. Star Trek Discovery brought the space opera back to TV screens in 2017 after 12 years away, and it did so while using a specific formula the Star Trek franchise still hasn't repeated since. Star Trek's modern era began with Discovery, and although the show wasn't universally praised, it did at least try several new things and open the door for more movies and TV shows. Not every season of Star Trek Discovery followed the same blueprint as the show's inaugural run, but it did revisit the concept a little in later seasons. The first effort from the TV franchise's modern era stood apart from every Star Trek show that had preceded it. Although there were several ways in which Discovery ultimately made Star Trek better, it was also criticized for straying too far from what made the franchise such a success. That being said, the show began with at least one huge hallmark from Star Trek's golden age, and it has perhaps been underappreciated for this reason. None of its successors have tried to pull it off again, nor does it look like Star Trek intends to attempt it anytime soon. Star Trek hasn't had a completely original set of main characters since Discovery's Season 1. Star Trek Discovery Season 1 was the perfect jumping-on point for new fans. There was no requirement for those watching to have any previous experience with the franchise, but pre-existing Trekkies could still pick up on its canonical relevance, such as the show's place in the Star Trek timeline. One of the most notable ways Discovery achieved this was by introducing an entirely new set of main characters. There was no backstory to be aware of other than the information supplied in the episodes. There is perhaps an argument for Star Trek Prodigy Season 1 filling this same criteria, but the presence of members of the Star Trek Voyager cast means it didn't do what Discovery did. Of course, this wasn't anything new at the time. Every previous Star Trek show had done exactly the same thing, perhaps with the exception of Star Trek, the animated series, which was really just a continuation of Star Trek, the original series. However, Star Trek Discovery was the last show to begin this way. There is perhaps an argument for Star Trek Prodigy Season 1 filling this same criteria, but the presence of members of the Star Trek Voyager cast means it didn't do what Discovery did. Star Trek Lower Decks is also in the argument for beginning with a wholly original batch of characters. On the other hand, the animated comedy is so riddled with cameos and references to the larger canon that the Star Trek franchise itself almost becomes a living, breathing character. While it's an absolute wonderland for established fans, it would be very difficult for newcomers to fully appreciate it. Even Star Trek Discovery eventually brought franchise legends on board. Star Trek Discovery Season 1 wasn't technically void of any references to big franchise characters. The controversial link between Michael Burnham, Sonequa Martin Green, and Spock Ethan Peck eventually was woven through the show's first run, but it didn't actually get properly paid off until Star Trek Discovery Season 2. Then, the show did what all of its successors were guilty of and revolved heavily around famous franchise characters like Spock and Captain Pike Anson Mount. Because Star Trek Discovery Season 1 looked so different and had so few references to the larger canon, there were swaths of long-standing fans who believed the show wasn't set in the Prime Universe, with one possibility being J.J. Abrams' Kelvin timeline from the rebooted movies. Bringing in legacy characters like Captain Pike and introducing the USS Enterprise a subtlety. When Star Trek Discovery premiered in 2017, it promised a fresh reimagining of Gene Roddenberry's utopian future, one armed with modern sensibilities, serialized storytelling, and an ambitious visual palette. Fans expected evolution. What they didn't expect was revolution. And that's exactly what Discovery delivered in its inaugural season when it made a storytelling choice so daring, so narratively seismic, that no Star Trek series since has found the nerve to follow suit. Simply put, Discovery chose to make Starfleet morally compromised. For over half a century, the Federation and its exploratory arm, Starfleet, had been Sci-Fi's paragon of idealism, a shining future where humanity's better angels had prevailed and exploration trumped exploitation. Sure, Starfleet captains occasionally bent the Prime Directive, and Section 31 whispered in the shadows, but by and large, the machinery of the Federation remained a force for good. That bright idealism was as much a signature of Star Trek as warp drives and phaser fire. Discovery's first season boldly flipped that script. In an audacious twist midway through the season, it was revealed that Gabriel Lorca Jason Isaacs, the seemingly hardened but principled captain of the USS Discovery, was not who he appeared to be. Lorca wasn't merely a war-hardened Starfleet officer with unconventional tactics. He was, in fact, a refugee from the Mirror Universe, a brutal alternate reality where the fascistic Terran Empire crushed all opposition underfoot. His calculated charisma and militaristic edge weren't just the scars of the Klingon War. They were hallmarks of a man from a universe where treachery and domination were second nature. This twist detonated like a quantum torpedo. Lorca's covert manipulation of Discovery's crew, his willingness to bend ethical boundaries, and his single-minded pursuit of returning to the Mirror Universe all underscored a thematic pivot rarely seen in Trek. Suddenly, the comforting certainty of Starfleet as a moral compass fractured. It wasn't just Lorca either. The entire season revealed an institution willing to flirt with ethically dubious strategies to win the Klingon War, culminating in the proposal to commit genocide against the Klingon homeworld itself. Never before had a Star Trek series so openly questioned whether Starfleet, the institution itself, could falter, fracture, or lose its way so deeply. And never since has it dared to do so again. Subsequent seasons of Discovery, as well as Picard, Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks, have touched on complex moral quandaries and bureaucratic overreach. Picard in particular delved into the Federation's apathy and political stagnation in the face of the Romulan refugee crisis. But none have dared to go as far as Discovery Season 1 did, placing moral rot and ideological compromise at the narrative core of Starfleet itself, rather than depicting it as an aberration or peripheral shadow agency. Why hasn't Trek repeated this experiment? Part of the answer lies in audience expectation. For all its temporal jumps, genre flips, and cinematic makeovers, Star Trek remains deeply tethered to its original ethos, a fundamentally optimistic view of the future. When Discovery unveiled Lorca's true origins and flirted with a Starfleet teetering on the brink of moral collapse, it rattled a bedrock belief for many fans, the idea that, no matter the hardship, the Federation always found its moral center. There was backlash. Some longtime viewers decried the darker tone as too cynical, too antithetical to Roddenberry's dream. Another reason is more pragmatic: narrative sustainability. You can only upend your fictional institution so often before you erode the foundation on which future stories are built. By revealing Lorca's deception and exposing Starfleet's near descent into atrocity, Discovery burned through a volatile storyline that, if revisited too often, risks normalizing corruption in a universe meant to inspire. A one-time shake-up shocks the system. Repetition numbs the audience. Yet, despite the controversy, that first season choice was undeniably bold and arguably necessary. By dragging Starfleet through the mud, Discovery didn't demolish Roddenberry's ideals. It stress-tested them. The show posed a vital question: can those ideals endure not just in the abstract, but when threatened by existential war and internal betrayal? The answer Discovery ultimately delivered was a resounding yes. Michael Burnham's Sonequa Martin Green impassioned stand against genocide reaffirmed Trek's core belief that